The ending of Onward is genius, here's why. Pixar films are always ripe with metaphor. They're allegories, personal, relatable human struggles conveyed through the fantastical lenses of toys, monsters, fists, etc. And I think Onward is a pretty special case, because it's the most fantastical lens they've offered yet, being a full-on magical fantasy with magical creatures abound, but it's also, simultaneously, perhaps Pixar's most personal, because it's based more specifically on its director's own personal life experience than any other Pixar movie. Take, for instance, Finding Nemo. Director Andrew Stanton was inspired to make that film after a day spent on a walk with his young son, being cautious and never letting him out of his sight. Until Stanton started to recognize his overprotective impulses. So it's sort of based on an idea that he had to come to terms with, a general truth of parenthood. Onward is more directly biographical, based very much on the life experience of its director, Dan Scanlon.
I have a personal connection with this film in that my father passed away when I was a year old and my brother was about 3, and we don't remember him, and so growing up we always had these questions of who was he and how were we like him.
But in their teen years, a relative found a tape recording of their dad that allowed them to finally hear the voice of their father once again, practically for the first time, which is represented in the film by Ian having his own recording of his departed dad. Today we have the resources to capture and back up any given moment of our lives, so it's easy to forget that not long ago, people didn't. So this is a very real thing, and real things can be hard to translate into fantastical adventures. It's easier said than done. So let's return to how Stanton did it with Finding Nemo. He took the fears of an overprotective parent and realized them in a high-stakes adventure, elevating them, putting the parent in his own worst-case scenario, his worst nightmare. But a worse nightmare where the admirable values of communication, understanding, and an ability to let go are the solutions to repairing the relationship between father and son.
How do you know something bad isn't gonna happen?
I don't!
And we don't either, but we still gotta do it. So Andrew Stanton perfectly translated that nutshell into a big adventure and came out with a movie that showcased his moral without compromising anything about it, instead complimenting it, heightening it, actually. But when you look at Onward, it's a much trickier case, because in the movie, Ian and Barley's goal is to see their dead father once more, but in real life, of course, you don't get that chance. You might be thinking, well, didn't Coco also face this issue of fantasy compromising the reality of death? Sure, but there are two major differentiating factors. Number one, the land of the dead, of course, stems from an established belief system, and number two, Miguel as a protagonist wasn't looking to upend death and meet relatives he never knew, despite the fact that it happened during the adventure. So, that story doesn't make reconvening with lost relatives out to be an attainable goal. But in Onward, yeah, I mean, the goal is bringing Dad back from the dead for a day, so yeah, that's the goal. And certainly not one that can be achieved in one's actual personal life. So you've got to wonder, is mixing this grounded and potentially very relatable story with a magical quest a recipe for disaster? When it comes down to it, merging the contrasting values of reality and fantasy is about as hard as, I don't know, merging lanes?
I'm not ready!
You'll never be ready!
It very well could be, honestly, but fear not. Lest we forget, we are guided on this quest by masters of the craft. But what could they possibly do here, though? Going into the movie, I really wasn't sure. I, too, as a person who, yes, heard the voice of a relative I never knew for the first time thanks to a chance tape recording my family found pretty recently, actually, was at a loss. When I thought about how this movie could end, all that I could picture, honestly, was the end of that movie, Jack Frost. You know, that movie where Michael Keaton plays the snowman who starts as a human and dies in a tragic accident and then returns to his son in an unlikely, cartoonish, removed manner, that cartoon snowman, and then at the end he has a final moment as a fully formed human with his former family at the end. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I guess, what I defaulted to in my head. The catharsis at the end of Pixar movies, despite how fantastical they get, is always so authentic. They never go for the obvious resolution. The characters learn something. I mean, the goal in this movie is for Ian and Barley to spend more time with their deceased father. And at the end of the movie, are the brothers just gonna do that? No, Pixar in its cleverness wouldn't just pitch it down the middle like that. I figured it has to be a false goal of some kind. That's a Pixar staple. Like Carl and Up thinking he failed his wife since they didn't get to go on the adventure they always planned. And then realizing that they did have an adventure together. The stuff I'm going to do section becomes stuff we did. Well, as it turns out, in Onward, we get a similar sort of scene to this Carl reading the adventure book moment, and at a similar part of the movie, too. You see, Ian also looks at a page of goals he feels like he hasn't met, a list of things he wants to do, only to realize that he, in fact, has. Stuff I'm going to do, once again, becomes stuff we did. Just not with his father, but with the brother who's been by his side all his life. Okay, so I figured that's very satisfying. So what now? Is that the end? Is the quest to bring back Dad ultimately a task in vain, and the moral that death can't truly properly be reversed? You know, basically the resurrection stone lesson? Well, there's certainly merit in that, but since the entire film is building to this potential reunion, it's going to come across as disappointing if it doesn't happen. Intentionally and meaningfully disappointing, perhaps, but disappointing nonetheless. And besides, in that case, the personal element and the fantasy element wouldn't come together. They wouldn't build each other up. They'd clash. So why then use fantasy to tell this story in the first place? But as it turns out, Scanlan and the Pixar team had a way to bring these two qualities together perfectly. You see, because no character in Onward ends this movie with a relationship that they didn't have in the beginning. Our main character, Ian, never gets to actually meet the dad he never knew. Put simply, he learns to appreciate what he has, who he has. The focus is instead, like any great Pixar film, on a change in perspective.
Some fresh, clear, well-seasoned perspective.
A coming to grips with the falseness of their goal. And this idea is baked into the thematic design of the film as a whole, right down to its integration of magic on a fundamental level. Onward's all about the longing for more than what we have now, but alas, the magic of long ago is gone. Except it isn't. It's all around us, it's right by our side. We just need to recognize it. Corey, the Manicure restaurant owner, learns to recognize her days of encouraging adventure are still as present as the map languishing on the wall of her dining establishment, waiting to be resumed. And Colt Bronco learns to use those feet beneath him and ride like the beautiful centaur he is. And Mom Laurel can go enjoy the fun nights out that have been waiting for her. And Ian, well, in the end, Ian's knowledge of his father still stems from secondhand sources, as it always did. But chief among them is his brother, and his brothers provided him with the bonding experiences he longed for with Dad all along. And it's been like that throughout the adventures shown off in the film too. As a botched magic spell of a pair of legs, Dad isn't quite there, but who's the one guiding him? The presence he's familiar with, serving as the toe-tapping communication barrier between Father and Ian, introducing them. It's Barley. And yes, Barley is granted this moment of magical reunion. We don't realize it at first, but Pixar starts setting the stage for this climax back in the scene when Barley tells Ian the story of the fourth memory he has of Dad. The one he doesn't like to remember. The one where, at the age of 3, Barley was put off by the state of his father in the hospital. As Barley describes it, Dad didn't look like himself. So Barley gives up what was his last chance to say goodbye. Suddenly, the reasoning behind his characteristic, daring boldness becomes clear. And not only that, we realize when we look back at the adventure, the deeper reason why Barley embraced his father's leg-based form so strongly. Even though he looks different, it's still Dad.
Oh, that's great! Dad, you look just like I remember.
And so, a magical spell gone wrong brilliantly communicates a personal truth, recontextualizing it to its bear. But now, Barley finally gets a chance to share a new memory, a fifth memory, with his brother. And that comes thanks to this climactic magical reunion. But the focus of the story is not on that. It is on Ian allowing Barley to achieve this closure, because he understands that he already has everything that he needs. And we, the audience, aren't with Barley as he reaches this moment of beautiful closure. We see it through Ian's perspective, removed from it, peering through an opening, trying to make out what's been said. And then Barley fills in the pieces for him, just like he always has. Because the real, tangible magic can be found through the person that you do know, and the stories they can share, and the time you can spend together. Ian learns to stop looking backward for something he can't get. Instead, enjoy his time with the person he'll continue to be with, as he looks onward.